It's a brand new week. You're welcome to the Economy and Politics Show. We have a conversation around politics, economy, and even investments as it affects the socio-economic space in Nigeria. It's the 24th day of August 2020. Like I said earlier, a brand new week, but we have the big news story about Nigeria's gross domestic product second quarter 2020 report from the National Bureau of Statistics, which showed that the economy contracted by minus 6.10%. It was, according to NBS, attributed to the impact of the global pandemic, COVID-19, on domestic and international economic activities. But we'll get to that conversation today, and we have to engage us in this conversation Professor Akpan Ekpo. Is an economist and also currently the chairman of the Akwa Ibom State Post-COVID-19 Economic Recovery Committee. He also has been involved in economic advisory role for over 3 decades, from the federal government to state level. So he is the man that we could engage today to discuss around the growth scenario in Nigeria. Apologies to our viewers for starting late for the new week. We hope to engage you further promptly as usual. But we're having Professor Akpan Ekpo due to some of our connectivity challenges. We'll be having him via audio, and I believe that it will be a very interesting conversation. So nice to have you, Professor Akpan Ekpo, and Happy New Week to you.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Yes, Prof.
Yes, Prof. So before we begin to look at Nigeria's economic growth scenario, the current contraction, it is not strange because several economies are experiencing contractions or even recessions. Based on your experience, we know that you also lectured in the US and schooled in the US. The US economy is experiencing a high unemployment level in terms of jobless claims and unemployment claims. The UK posted its worst recession in 10 years, and even Japan, a G7 economy, also is posted a recession. So the contraction that is reported for Nigeria, several other economies, industrial economies, and even emerging markets are showing signs of that contraction. What is your overview in terms of how this is impacting Nigeria?
Well, thank you very much. The recession, which is global, has adverse impact on the Nigerian economy for several reasons. But first of all, the recession has been caused by mainly the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, for a country like Japan, this is the first recession since I think 2015 or so, and being the third world largest economy, it is very, very serious there. But let me say that technically, recession is defined as when you have 2 consecutive negative growth, 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, then you have a recession. Okay. And for Japan, for UK, that has occurred. In America, that wasn't the case, but the NBR, National Bureau of Economic Research, said America has entered a recession because the unemployment rate dipped very, very.
So still trying to address our connectivity challenges. Hopefully we'll get Professor Akpan Ekpo back on board, a resource economist in Nigeria. Like I said earlier, he's been involved in economic advisory in the country for over 3 decades, and we're just trying to give us a very interesting analogy of why the whole global scenarios of contraction and recessions is impacting Nigeria. Just trying to give us insight into the American Economic Research Team, highlighting why globally there's recession and the financial crisis that we witnessed in 2008, 2009 may come in at a very great intense level. And the US jobless claims is huge, running to about 10 million currently. And this is why the American government is working Okay, Prof, it's a bit difficult hearing you. Maybe if you could reconnect again. Yeah, so some challenges having Prof again, the connectivity. So like we're saying, Prof is trying to give the analogy that Japan, which is the third largest economy in the globe, known for manufacturing and technology, posted its recession and shows you how very intense this period of the pandemic has been on the global economy, from the growth levels to even unemployment. And like I said earlier, trying to get his insight, the UK posted its worst recession in 10 years, and the UK is a G7 economy and one of the key financial centers in the globe. This is just the kind of scenarios we're seeing across the globe. Economies like Indonesia also posted a contraction, Malaysia. So the trend we see in Nigeria cannot be divulged from what we're seeing globally. But the major aspect of this conversation today is how we can see a very robust response in that. I think we have Prof back now. Okay, Prof, can you hear me now? Prof, I was saying if you could reconnect again so we can hear you very well, because you were trying to drive at a point. American economy.
Yeah.
Okay, we hope to have Professor Akpan Ekpo reconnect, and then we hear his perspective on the global scenario, and we'll move on to Nigeria's current economic state and the GDP report. But what we can say concerning this is, globally, it had been warned of a
global downturn. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank had warned of a crisis for the global economy and need for fiscal and monetary policy makers to align their policies and find a way to ensure that the whole space is stabilized because of the shocks and the effect of the COVID-19 crisis. And this also is a twin shock with the global crude oil price volatility. The market has been volatile this year, and that particularly has impact on Nigeria, which is an oil-producing country. So Japan, like I said earlier, is in a recession. And like Professor Akpan Ekpo said, a recession is when you have two consecutive quarters of negative growth. That's something that everybody should understand. Two consecutive quarters of negative growth is when you can say that a country is in recession. Also, the UK is in a recession. That's another major economy in the world that is facing economic challenge. And of course, the US is addressing a huge unemployment challenge. And so that shows you from the global scenario how economies are trying to navigate. Several economies have posted contractions, like I said earlier. Economies like Indonesia, which is, according to Jim O'Neill, the economist who pegged Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey as the four other frontiers, apart from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, that are named the BRICS. So there's also the Mint. So several of these economies are also posting negative growth and contraction. Same with Malaysia. So it's a global scenario. That's why 6.10% negative growth of Nigeria is part of what we're seeing across the globe. And it is important that we see from the macroeconomic and strategic perspective how this particular scenario will be addressed. Prof, can you hear me now? Still trying to get Prof, and I think it's gone off now. And so we're also going to look at the fact that apart from the global scenario recession, Nigeria also is facing a stagflation period, which is when you have high unemployment of 27.1%, going side by side a high inflation rate of 12.82%. So you can imagine how the Nigerian economy is facing that pressure and crisis, and what the fiscal and monetary policy makers in the country would have to do to respond to it. Apart from the fact that Nigeria is in a stagflation state from economic analysis, there's a need for the right policy response. And what better policy response do we need at this point? Currently, we have the Economic Sustainability Plan, which is chaired by the Vice President, Professor Akpan, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. That plan got the final approval by June, month of June. And of course, the Federal Executive Council approved it in terms of the support required. And we'll talk about a stimulus plan of over 2 trillion naira to bring the economy back to life in terms of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also address several sectors that can scale growth and provide jobs for unemployed youth. As we said earlier, we're facing an unemployment crisis in the country, currently 27.1%, millions of young Nigerians out of jobs or even unemployed and even underemployed. So that scenario calls for the right policy mix and right policy response in the country. The ESP is geared towards addressing areas like mass housing, addressing issues like renewable energy, and also looking at how it can encourage the ICT, that's the information and communication technology space, in developing softwares and technologies that can be applicable to Nigeria. It is also looking at localizing its utilization of resources, for example, bitumen, to carry out construction activities. It's also looking at special jobs programs that can be driven across the country and supporting the economy. So the ESP is one plan and strategy that stakeholders are watching to see how it tries to revive the economy. Another school of thought believes that beyond federal government intervention, which is very important, there needs to be that nexus between government and the private sector, public and private sector. So the role of private sector also in driving growth and sustaining the economy is very key at this time. Professor Akpan Ekpo, can you hear me now? Prof, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so Prof, you were talking about the...
I hear you.
Okay, you were talking about the American Economic Research Group that talked about the unemployment claims. Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. So can you go on?
I can hear you.
Okay, Prof. Okay. You were talking about the American Economic Research Group that were giving the analysis on the unemployment claims. All right, so Prof, still connectivity issues. We would look at having Prof come on board again. I believe that it's not been the connectivity has still had its own challenge this morning. So, like we were saying, the stagflation state in the nation is a challenge and needs to be addressed.
It's not, yes, technical.
Okay. Prof, I think we still have challenges with your connectivity. Yes, we can hear you, but we can hear you, but the connectivity is still a challenge.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you can go on. Yeah.
Yes, I have tried all my assistants.
Yeah. So I think Prof is really making a lot of effort to connect. So we will still try to get Prof on board in subsequent edition. If he tries again and he can't connect, I believe we can have that conversation. So like we're saying, the GDP of Nigeria report that came out for second quarter of 2020 reemphasizes that need for Nigeria to really look at how it can navigate this challenging period. Now, for policymakers across the world, whether we're going to have a crisis, that is inevitable, but how we respond to that crisis becomes very key. So from the analysis, Nigeria's gross domestic product decreased by -6.10% year-on-year in real terms for the second quarter of 2020. And this ended a 3-year trend of low but positive real growth since 2016, when Nigeria had its last recession. And like I said earlier, the decline was largely attributable to the significantly lower levels of both domestic and international economic activity during the quarter. This resulted from nationwide shutdown efforts aimed at containing the COVID-19 pandemic. The domestic efforts ranged from initial restrictions of human and vehicular movement across the globe. Yes, and that was the challenge and reason why Nigeria recorded this minus 6.10% negative growth that we are reporting today. In terms of comparing it to the corresponding quarter of second quarter 2019, that was 2.12% in terms of that quarter growth, and that indicated a drop of minus 8.22% points and a fall of minus 7.97% points when compared to the first quarter of 2020, which was 1.7%. And so the real GDP declined by minus 2.18% year on year, compared with 2.11% recorded in the first half of 2019. Quarter on quarter, real gross domestic product decreased by minus 5.04%. Furthermore, only 13 activities recorded positive real growth compared to 30 in the preceding quarter. So 13 economic activities were the drivers of the growth in the country compared to 30 in the previous quarter. So that is part of the analysis. And when we look at the real growth of the oil sector, which has always been the driving force in the Nigerian economy, it was minus 6.63% year on year in the second quarter, indicating a decrease of minus 13.8% points relative to the rate recorded in the corresponding quarters. For the non-oil sector, it declined by minus 6.05% in real terms during the reference quarter, second quarter 2020. It was the first decline in real non-oil gross domestic product growth rate since third quarter 2017. The recorded growth was minus 7.70% points. Let's look at some sectors in terms of the growth activity. The non-oil sector output was driven by the financial and insurance institutions, the information and communication technology, that's the telecommunications space, agriculture, particularly crop production, and public administration, moderating the economy-wide decline. On the other hand, sectors which experienced a high negative growth included transport and storage, accommodation and food services, construction, education, real estate, and trade, among others. In real terms, the non-oil sector accounted for 91.07% of aggregate GDP in the second quarter of 2020, slightly higher than the share recorded in second quarter of 2019, which was 91.02%, as well as the first quarter of 2020, which was 90.50%. Let's see if we can have Professor Akpan Ekpo again to just give his perspective on our growth scenario. Prof, can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but
Can you hear me?
yes, well, I think it's still the challenge of the network. It's still faint. Yeah. Yeah. So what will happen is, yeah. Yes. Yeah. So what will happen is we would like you to connect. If not, then we'll set this for a subsequent edition conversation.
Technically.
Yes.
Yes. It's still technically it's not yet in a recession.
Okay.
Because it's only they go into a recession technically. It's a serious downturn.
Okay.
This quarter is negative growth.
Okay, so Prof has been trying to connect.
The technical is spread all my Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Prof has really tried, and we commend him, but we owe Prof a special session again, and we assure him that definitely we'll work that out to have him feature speaking on this growth scenario. But what Prof has said is that it's a downturn, but not the recession yet for Nigeria, and has significant impact looking at the slide from 1.87% 6.4% to minus 6.10%, but it's not a recession. It's in terms of technical analysis from economics perspective, a downturn. So let's take note of that. Like I said, this is a scenario that is not just isolated to Nigeria. Several economies of the globe are posting contractions. So for those of you watching and observing the global economic space, we may be in for a real global financial economic crisis if the COVID-19 pandemic effect is not mitigated effectively. So all the warnings we've been hearing from the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, and World Health Organization boils down to the impact of the response of fiscal and monetary policy authorities across the globe, particularly Nigeria, based on these developments. And when you look at the fact that the activities that drove economy for previous quarter was 30 and now 13, it shows a lot has to be done in terms of driving economy. So Nigeria, in terms of its economic overview, is facing a huge challenge at this point. But it's not a recession yet, but it's a downturn. We have a high unemployment rate of 27.1%. We are currently having a contraction of minus 6.10%, high inflation of 12.82%, high poverty rate of 40.1%. All shows you that there's a lot of pressure now in terms of response across board. We also want to discuss with Professor Akpan Ekpo in terms of the response of states, government, because states play a very key role in driving economy. We hope to have him discuss that in subsequent editions. But indeed, it shows, therefore, that the time for action is now. The fiscal space will need to reinvent a strategy in terms of how it's going to respond to drive economic activities. On the global and in terms of the global scale, it is showing the indications that, yes, COVID has really hit global sectors, from aviation to the oil and gas sector, to even the agro sector, and even down to logistics and transportation. All these major sectors are being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and its disruptions on socioeconomic activities. And this, once again, calls for some strategy and reinvention of approach in economic strategy. So you can join the conversation by telling us how you think we can respond, policy makers can respond in terms of fiscal and monetary approach in this time. And the hashtag is AskWebTV. Send your comments and your questions, your views and perspectives to hashtag AskWebTV because we'll continue this conversation during the week on how we can address this current scenario in Nigeria, stagflation plus increased pressures on the economy. Like I said earlier, I'd like to remind our viewers that the big news for today is that Nigeria's economy for the second quarter of 2020 has contracted by minus 6.10%. But this is not isolated. Major economies have posted recession. I told you Japan posted its first recession in many years. UK posted its first recession in over 10 years. And the US currently is posting a huge jobless claims in terms of people that do not have jobs or are unemployed are increasing in over 10 million. And that's the highest in many years. There's also the warning, like I said earlier, that we may be getting back to the era of the 1930s where we had the Great Depression. Many, many people would not be able to experience that because it was more of the baby boomers who were alive then to tell the story of how that depression affected the entire globe. So, wherever you are across the world and watching this program, you now know that COVID-19 has had its impact on the global economy as Nigeria and several other countries are posting various levels of contractions and some economies are showing recessions. No economy is isolated from this crisis. It also brings to the fore the need for a proper coordination of policies. And we would like to see the response level of the federal government. But this time also, the state governments have a role to play because they also help to drive activities for the economy. Well, we'll leave it at that and we'll continue this conversation in the course of the week on how we can move our economy forward. And we'd like you to note that the GDP 2020 report that just published by the National Bureau of Statistics is available on the ProShare website. Just log on to www.proshareng.com and that's the big story on our main page. And you can log on and download the reports to read through the impact across all the sectors. And you would get more insight on it. We'll also give you commentary and other interviews in the course of the week. We also hope to have back in our program Professor Akpan Ekpo to speak further in terms of the dimensions and approach in addressing this scenario. But it's a huge drop, like I said earlier, from 1.87% in first quarter of 2020. We experienced this contraction of minus 6.10%. A major driver, the oil sector also contracted, and the non-oil sector both also contracted. So that shows you that the next quarter, that's the third quarter, if we post a negative growth scenario again, then Nigeria will be witnessing another recession, and this will be the first since 2016 when we recovered from the recession of that phase, 2016-2017. And of course, the analysts had talked about it, projected it, and said it. And I will ramp up with the words of Mohamed El-Erian, one of the notable financial analysts and economists. And he said, the COVID-19 pandemic brings the globe to experience one of the worst shocks and economic crisis to experience. And so from the stable of such analysts, this is something that must be addressed and must be taken with every level of seriousness from the policy side. The ball lies in the courts of our policymakers to approach this head-on and see how we can navigate and manage the scenario. That'll be all for the Economy and Politics show today. You can join our website, www.prochange.com, to watch our videos, read our news reports and analysis. Send your comments and views to news@prochange.com, and we would receive them and respond to you. You can also join us on our social media handles that's playing on the screen. By 10 a.m., we will continue this conversation on Nigeria's second quarter GDP growth and implications for the capital markets. We have an expert that will be joining us to converse around these reports. And to all our viewers, we wish you to stay safe. Till we come here again, thank you for watching and have a nice day.